Hi, everybody. Welcome in to Entrepreneur. My microphone is working. My camera is working. And so I know you can see me. I feel like I'm talking like Oscar right now. I did do a live with him. So if you missed it, how are you? Welcome into session 1 of Magical Entrepreneur for February, our 4th month. How did that happen? I feel like I still am talking about this as my brand new class, and it's not. We are a third of the way through it. So I'm so thrilled to see you. Please get excited about Tucson. The beautiful blonde to my left is coming with me, and we are going to take it by storm, everybody. Take it Tucson by storm. And we're going to see and do as much as we can do in 3 days. Lee has not been to Tucson, so she's asked me some adorable questions. She doesn't realize it's an average of 5 miles a day walking. She's in better shape than I am, so that'll be fine for her. She doesn't realize it's dirty. It's huge, right? And I have certain places that I need to go, and then certain places I want to go. So it's going to be a little hustle bustle, but I'm here for it. I'm here for it. We're just going to do it. So buckle up, everybody. Tonight, I'm really, I'm always excited about Entrepreneur. Each class has a flavor. Anybody new tonight? I would like to welcome anybody who's new. We have had some people join programs, and I'm thrilled because this would be actually, I always say it, but like there's never a bad time to join, but this is an interesting point in our program together. And I will apologize. I am still coughing, even though I'm taking cough medicine and cold medicine and everything. It's just whatever this is lingering. So I just do my best and keep on going. Cersei said to you, just tie yourself too early and go for the ride. Yeah, we are bringing Oscar. Of course we're bringing Oscar. I don't have pneumonia. I just have a lingering cough. So that's good. But anyway, if you are new, what an interesting time to be here. Tonight is, I'm going to tell some stories tonight that are a little vulnerable, but relevant. This topic of the wounded leader. It's very near and dear to my heart. And what's interesting about it is I think all of us, let me not speak for you, me, but maybe you, and you can say yes if this is true for you, have either felt like a wounded leader or experienced leadership with someone who's wounded. And the process that I have been going through for the past 3 years, but really in a focused way for the past 6 to 12 months, has been understanding my own wounds, and both what it was like to try to lead an organization with sort of an open bleeding wound, and what it's like to lead with someone who's got a wound that isn't being addressed, and also what it's like to be led by someone who's got wounds. What I want to say about this is, before we start, I'm going to start with one of my favorite quotes in Latin, which is ad astra per aspera. Ad astra means to the stars. Ad astra, like astrology. Per aspera means Paris through, and aspera is aspera is hardship. We reach the stars through struggle. I actually want to have it tattooed across my back, like a big banner with a bunch of stars on my shoulders. But I'm in my tattoo era right now, so you can tell. I have a friend who is a very sexy lady, and she has ad astra per aspera tattooed down her leg in like a cascade with stars down to her ankle. It's very sexy. My legs are this long, so it's not as sexy. She's tall, so tall people can do things like that, and it looks sexy. If I did it, it probably would look like somebody branded me. So short people have to do tattoos in a different way. I sure will. Let me put it in the feed for you. Ad astra per aspera. Aspera is an interesting word. Latin, the roots of Greek and Latin is a class that I used to teach at university, and aspera, struggles, is also related to the word aspirations, it's sort of a combination of struggle and spira, which is spirit. Like your aspirations are the things you aspire to, but are going to challenge your soul. So it's a beautiful Latin quote, lots of deep meaning. And like I said, there's different translations. Through hardships to the stars, a rough road leads to the stars, and to the stars through struggle. To the stars through struggle is the literal English translation from the Latin. It's beautiful, isn't it? So this is an incredibly personal topic for me, but I think it's also relevant to everybody because everybody's a leader. Even if the only person you're leading is you, that's actually the hardest leadership role you'll have in your lifetime. And the one that you'll probably struggle with the most. If you have children, you are a leader. Parents are leaders. I hate to break it to you. But you are. And you're the first person who teaches your children about leadership. So you better become really conscious of it, which is, it's helpful that you're here. The more you know, the better you can do. And then if you lead anything in your community, if you lead an organization, I've led now quite a few. I've led organizations within organizations, and I've led organizations. So I know what it's like to be a manager. If you define manager as being someone who leads and is also led, right? So then you're kind of a manager. A leader doesn't have someone who's leading them. So I've been in both of those roles. Ultimately, I think even if you are someone who doesn't have someone who leads you, you are led by the people you serve. If you kind of align to my theory of servant leadership, right? So I don't have a boss, but I do, because the people who work for me and you have needs, and those needs drive my schedule, my behavior, my responses and reactions, and my prioritization. So I think every leader does have someone who leads them, but it's about how you perceive. Some people, when they get to be a CEO of a company, are like, I ain't got no boss, I boss, or whatever. And it's like, I think that's a little dangerous, right? Everything benefits from a system of checks and balances. And it's hard for me to say that as someone with a big Sagittarian placement. And the other piece, which Lauren put in the feed, she's so true, she's so correct, is that we're all wounded. My theory, you can grapple with me if you want, but I'm still going to say that I think I'm right, is that we all came here with a wound. We came in kind of broken. I think it's the human condition, because I think that ad astra perispera quote is really true. Haven't you learned the most from your challenges? You know, it would be so nice if life was just so easy and we never met with obstacles or had to encounter anything that pushed back on us. But we don't learn the best that way, right? So we learn through challenges. And I'm going to share some personal stories tonight of how this has affected me. I'm going to ask also that you share whatever you're willing to share about how this has affected you. My situation, my deepest struggle with this was working with someone in a co-role, right, as co-leader, who actually was causing a wound and then would not support the process that I needed to go through to do what I'm going to teach you tonight. And if you find yourself in that situation, you know, we're going to talk about, there are some what I call untenable situations where the only way out is out. You know, the saying is the only way out is through. Sometimes the only way out is out. And I had to make a very difficult decision to leave something behind that mattered a great deal to me because it was untenable. So we're going to talk about all of this tonight, right? Really, really deep, thick stuff, but I've got a ton of leadership theory behind it. And I've got a ton of notes. There's 6 pages of notes for tonight, so I'm not going to spend too long on the wind up. I do want to say, if you're new, that session 1 is more of the kind of traditional leadership business school stuff. Session 2 is more of the magic. And the concept for next class, which is next Tuesday, is called the 7 Heavy Heroes. And it is, the subject is managing big emotions through energy work. So I'm going to be teaching you kind of the energy side of what we're talking about tonight. And then the 3rd session, which will be the Tuesday after that, is going to be the integration and application, where we pull it all together. So yeah, when I have a 6-pager, y'all know we're going to be here the whole time. And I'm gonna leave time for Q&A though, because I really do think that your questions and also your answers are going to be very valuable to all of us. I personally, because I know a lot of you, and some of you I'm just getting to know this year through this work, but I'm super curious about where some of the stuff I'm going to teach you tonight has shown up for you, what you learned from it, how you managed it, and I'm going to share candidly. There were points in my process where I managed it as well as I could have, and points where I could have done better. And that's easier to see in the rearview mirror. That's the tough part of life. You know what I mean? We can look back and go, well, that probably wasn't my shiningest moment. But I will say too, I do look back. I was prepping class last night while I was falling asleep. I was telling Lee, because there's so much to do. I was doing a lot of preparing for today last night. But I do my best thinking right before I fall asleep. And I actually was so moved by my thinking process that I went and got my journal and wrote, which I hadn't done in a few weeks because it's been busy around here. And I was writing in my journal last night about, how do I say this in a way that doesn't sound weird? I was writing about how proud of myself I am. Because my journal isn't that. Like, my journal is usually like, this is what I'm struggling with right now, or this is what's going on, or because I write to get clarity. It's how I process. But I really hadn't taken a moment just to go, you know what, girl? Like, shit. And it was very emotional. Like, I fell asleep that way, and I didn't have any dreams last night. And I had been having crazy dreams like the last few nights before that. I had no dreams last night that I can remember. But I slept really well. And I really just did have a moment of, you know what, maybe someone could have done it better than you. Probably. But with what you had to work with, you did the best you could. And in life, that's all we can ask. I'm teaching my daughter that, because she's going through her own struggles and sometimes feels bad about it. And we're all going through a lot right now. And I'm always just like, no one's ever going to ask more of you than your best. If you're not giving your best, then yeah, you have more to give, right? So I just wanted to say, sometimes it is good to sit back and go, and to look back and go, because it's easy to say, you coulda, you woulda, you shoulda. And to just take a moment and go, but you did, and good for you. So I hope that you have those moments for yourself too. And I did think about this as a tattoo, because I thought, if someone digs up my, they post pictures of mummies on Facebook sometimes, and you can see their tattoos and stuff. Like, if someone did oddly dig me up out of a bog or something 10,000 years from now and post me on their version of Facebook, that is one quote I would want them to see. It could be a teachable moment. Like, what does her tattoo say? Oh, it says, through hardship, we reach the stars. Okay, so I'm going to dive right in. In leadership, we expect hardship. If you're going to lead, and I'm sure there's going to be like a lot of amens tonight, because I know I'm preaching to the choir. In leadership, you are going to be challenged. You will have crisis moments. You're going to do things people don't like. You're going to fail. You're going to let people down. You're going to disappoint people. This is part of the process of leading. When we have children, whether we adopt them or have bio children, we all think we're going to do it like super perfect. And we've read the books, right? What to expect when you're expecting. And we have all the equipment. And, we fuck it up. We say the wrong thing. We get upset, and our kids see us having a meltdown. It's like, I'm sorry, mommy's got big emotions too, or whatever. Like, we have moments where we don't do exactly things the way we should. And those are hard moments too, because we disappoint ourselves. The moments in life where I've let myself down are the moments that are really, really soul crushing. Kids don't come with training manuals. Half the time I felt like I should probably take this baby back because I didn't get the clearly everybody else got, the mommy and me classes were all these really put together moms in their little jog suits, and they just all looked like they totally knew what they were doing. And I just felt like I just didn't know. So I was just using my intuition, and I wasn't one of those kids who babysat. I didn't really like kids when I was young. I didn't want that. When they were scream and cry and stuff, I was just like, diapers. And I didn't want any of that. So I love my own kids, but I didn't really love other people's kids. And so I definitely felt less equipped than people who babysat all their lives and, know exactly what to do. Right. I'm just kidding. You can't send them back. I kept mine. So, but you have those moments where you're like, were you supposed to give me something and I didn't? Okay, there's a website for that. Let me check that out. Right. So we are going to fail. And I think it's actually really good to know that at the outset and admit that, like, you're not going to do everything right. You're going to let people down. You're going to disappoint people. People always want more from a leader. More, 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 more. Kids always need more, 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 more. One of the things I was looking at last night, I don't want to start getting into next week's class because next week is Chiron and I'm not getting ahead of myself. But Chiron is both your wound and your purpose, part of your purpose. Why are you here? The wound in you, and then what that wound is meant to teach you and other people. Part of my Chiron placement, what I'm actually meant to teach people, and this is so true for me, but it's been so uncomfortable, is how through self-care and through taking care of myself, I can do a better job leading and taking care of other people. So, I was always that mom where it was like, I was going to take the time to, let the kids watch a show and cook breakfast for myself. Or I don't do a super great job of it, but sometimes, like, I still will go and get my nails done every 2 weeks. Like, I don't miss it. I don't miss a beat. I like having a pedicure. It's the only time strangers rub me and I enjoy it. I just look forward to it. And I make that time no matter what else is going on. Sometimes it's more like 3 weeks. This time it's going to be 3 weeks. But I would always make time for myself. And I was unapologetic about it. Now, part of that is my mom was the ultimate example of not that. My mom never put makeup on, never got her nails done. And which is weird because she was a cosmetologist, but she just thought that was selfish. She really did. She didn't want to take time to get ready. So my mom kind of had very similar clothing that she would wear, very simple clothing, very simple shoes. She didn't put jewelry on. Her life was all about us. What that led to was us feeling like we had to do things for her because she was kind of living through us. Right. So what do you mean you're not going to play the flute all the way through college? What do you mean you're not going to, blah, blah, blah. So we felt like we had to live up to these expectations that she had because she didn't have her own identity. We became her identity, right? So I've tried to have my own identity. And what that's led to is I don't have expectations of my kids to be anything in particular because I don't need them to be that for me. I want them to be what they want to be. But there's a balance to be struck there, right? So when we get to Chiron, we are going to talk about your wound. But your wound, as we're going to talk about tonight, as a leader is really important for you to understand because it's the place where people see you. Everybody sees your wound. Like, we all think we're doing a great job of hiding it, but you're not hiding anything from anybody. I'm sure if I asked you right now what my wound is or what my wounds are, I'm sure you could identify them. And part of it is I've told you what they are before. So it would kind of be cheating because I've been pretty transparent. To the extent that I'm aware of them at 51 years old, my wounds are pretty visible to people. And so it's good because you know what they are. Now, wounds can be activated and people can take advantage of your wounds. It becomes a button they can push. And that happened to me a lot in the early part of my leadership career, having people push my buttons because people will manipulate stuff. It's just what they do. And I love people, but as well as I do, people have a little shitty side to them too. And when they get triggered, they want to push that button because they, it's like, you trigger me, I'm going to trigger you right back. And it can become this little like sparring match. And the only way to heal that is to finally once and for all heal yourself, because nobody can push a button that doesn't exist. Like, looking back, stuff that happened to me as a leader that was felt all personal and triggery and all these things really would not land the same way now because you just can't activate that part of me anymore. Well, great, but it took 50 years to get there, for God's sake. I mean, in my 30s, those places were activatable. In my 40s, those places were activatable. Now, there's still some places where you can get to me, right? There's still some little bits and pieces, but it's kind of hard. And that's the process of healing. And that's why people, one of my favorite things to do is to spend time with people in their 70s and 80s, because if they've done their work, they seem peaceful. And the reality is they've had hard lives and gone through struggles, but the reason they seem peaceful to us and so grounded to us and so wise to us is because their wounds are healed. They've got scar tissue. Don't you be concerned about that. They do. But their wounds are not like open bleeding like mine were for a long time. And there's a lot of people in my life with big gaping wounds, and they try to put a Band-Aid. I call it putting a Band-Aid on an artery, right? Like they've got this like bleeding, gushing artery, and they're like, here, let me put this little mini size Hello Kitty Band-Aid on it. And it's like, nope, that artery is going to bleed you right out. So I think it's really important to know what those things are and to heal them. I can also see in my life, because I've done this work for a long time and taught it for a long time, and I've done, even now, I'm still learning different aspects of this process. I can see when people around me are doing it too, healing those big wounds. And you see them grow and rise, and they look different. Like they show up differently in the world. They carry themselves differently. And so tonight's really important. And I hope through some of the examples that I share with you that you can find yourself in those stories, because I bet you can. So what is hard for us is always the wound. I call it wound adjacent. Okay. So what we struggle with is wound adjacent. It's your area of challenge is right next to your biggest pain point in your soul, the thing that's really hurting you. So when you look around in your life and you say, okay, where am I struggling? Where am I not making progress? Right? Is it in parenting? Is it in relationships? Is it at work? That's getting really close to your wound, the place that you have some kind of deep fissure, right? Something is cut. And when you get to that core challenge or that core struggle or that issue, that's when you really know why you're here. So when people are like, how do I find out my soul's purpose? And they say it in the sweetest voice, smiling. And I'm always like, you got to find out where you've been nearly decapitated. That's actually where it is. And, for me, I was so incredibly wounded at different points in my childhood. Incredibly bullied in middle school. And then in high school, I had a terrible principal of my local high school. And I don't care if you look up and find out who he is. I don't know if he's alive anymore, but God bless his soul. God rest his soul. Not a great leader. And I actually had the chance to go back and tell him that as a much older person. once I sent him my graduation announcement when I got my PhD, because he was such a dick, and his name was Dick, actually. And I said, dear Dick, I hope this piece of mail finds you well. Enjoy. Sincerely, Dr. Athena Parakas, PhD. Because he told me in his office, and my parents too, that we were all so blessed that they owned a restaurant, because Athena was going to need to be a waitress for the rest of her life, because she had no other skills, and because she had so poorly performed academically and had not evidenced any ability to do better in school. So thank God I would always have a restaurant where I could wait tables. And you know what? I waited tables for a long time. And I still think it is, I always felt like I was taking care of the people I was serving. I love you too. But he wasn't saying it in like a kind way, right? He was being a dick. So I was very excited to tell Dick that I had finished my PhD when that time came. No academic administrator should ever tell a child, and I consider anyone under the age of 18 a child, should ever tell a child what they're capable of that they should be grateful that they have somebody that can, take care of them for the rest of their lives. I mean, when I look back, it's like educational malpractice. He should have been removed. But I bided my time. And I sent him a lovely letter at the end of that long process. And it felt really good to do it. And he wrote back, he wrote me a card. When I opened it, I was like, oh God, what's it going to say? And all it said was, "Dear Athena, with God, all things are possible." And I thought, yeah, well, God and a whole lot of hard work, my friend. But I do want to say, and I've had administrators crouch on that moment of saying things to my kids that, are judgmental. And I literally am like, remember who I am and what I am trained to do. Don't do that. Yeah, watch it, friend. Don't do that. So my wound has always been, am I smart enough? Was he right? Was he right? What if I haven't shown the capability to be smart? And there's still, I mean, not so much now, but even up until a few years ago, there was a little, like, it still makes me teary, like, oh my God, what if I'm not smart? What if I just got lucky? What if I fooled everybody the whole way? You know what I mean? And what if he was right? And that when the things bring you to tears, that's how you know, like, you're really at that place. Like, look what it does to me now. Like, what if he was right? You know what I mean? And the shitty things that happen to us in relationships and the things that our partners say and the things that happen are so incredibly impactful, and we have to be mindful of that. And I have had my own moments where I've said things, that I'm sure were hurtful, right? Well, but I'm just saying, you have those moments where it's like, what if he was right? So what do? I over prepare, right? I overdo it. I bring too much content when I teach. I always have more than I can get to in the time I have. I write too much. I'm getting better about that. But when I list a product, I write too much information because, what if it's not enough? What if it's not good enough? Right? I'm just saying. So I'm still working through all of this and still experiencing this. And I want you to know that, because sometimes I think people even put me on a pedestal, and it's like, don't do that. You know what I mean? I have had to crawl through mud and walk through fire to get to this where I can sit with you and have these conversations. And it's been incredibly difficult. So, but parents can do the same thing. And there was a moment, like, my dad was always my biggest supporter, my mom less so, but my dad was really a big supporter for me. I mean, my mom tried, but it was just, we always had problems. But even my dad at one point said, like, I'll believe it when I see it. I know you say you're going to go and do big things in college and stuff, but I haven't seen it yet. I'll believe it when I see it. And so I still felt like I was proving something the whole time. And there was a point where he said, I believe it now. I've seen it. So I got that kind of fulfillment of him saying, you really did make good on your promise, right? So this month, we study the work of a lifetime. This is what I wrote in your notes. And it really is the work of a lifetime. I'm 51, and I think I'm like, on a good day, I'm probably like 80% of the way there, 80, 85. The fact that you can still see me get that close to still feeling that, like it's right under the surface, tells me I'm probably not better than 80%, because today's a good day. And nothing's been triggered today, but just even telling you that story as your sister and kind of like being vulnerable with you, it's like, fuck, it's still right there. It's so close to the surface. Okay, now stop crying now so I can read my notes. I'm going to Leo it up. I'm acting like a damn Pisces over here. Knock it off. So we have to understand our rough roads, our wounds, our struggles, and our hardships in order to prepare ourselves to bring stronger leadership for ourselves, our family, our communities, and all the people that we serve, which includes, your family members, right? A lot of us are in service to older family members, or, we're caregivers. So again, I want you to really cast your leadership net when you're thinking about all these things with me, really cast that net widely, because you serve a great collective. And thank you for your kind words. Teaching is my passion. And I have always so appreciated good teachers, who meet their students where they are and who take complex topics and can break them down in a simple way, but still leave me feeling like I really learned something. Because I think wisdom is so valuable. And I love changing people's minds about learning. I love taking a student who says, I'm going to hate this class, and like showing them that they don't hate it, which I spent a good chunk of my career doing. But here's what I want to say. Failure to do this work sets us up for projections and difficulty, lifelong conflict. And one of the things, I was watching a reel the other night, and it doesn't matter who it was. I watch a lot of different people, but there's no one person who I'm like, oh, I just love everything they say, right? There really isn't. So I would refer you to people if there was, but still, there's still like edges of things I don't always love. But here's the one kind of person who I don't think can actually do this work. There's one kind of person. And I'm not going to put a label on it because I think we throw labels around. I have the DSM-4 downstairs. I had to have it for graduate school. So my PhD is not in psychology, but my subspecialty was adult development and adult psychological development. So I took most of my electives in my PhD program in the psychology department, which probably doesn't surprise you. And so we had to learn a lot about not necessarily diagnosing different mental health challenges, but certainly understanding the signs and symptoms, because if it's in your classroom, it's in your domain, right? If I have a student who's struggling with symptoms of some type of particular challenge, it helps me to know as a practitioner what I'm dealing with, and then see if I can partner with whoever I need to in their lives to help them be successful, right? People who really don't think they do anything wrong, whatever you want to label that, if you want to label that, but there are people who don't think they do anything wrong. Can't do this work because you're going to have to accept that you've done things wrong, right? Like the stories I'm telling you tonight are places where I have not met the mark, could have done things better. And so in order to do this work, you have to be able to say, this is not only my wound, but this is how that wound showed up when I was not in a healed space, and it got projected out, right? And created what the research calls spillage. And I'll share some of the research, the names of the researchers and stuff tonight as I go through my notes with you. Because this, a lot of this is coming from the leadership literature. Some of it's coming out of educational leadership literature, and some of it's coming out of mainstream sort of organizational and behavioral literature. But so spillage is a technical term. So people who don't think they do anything wrong, I do kind of give up there. And I don't like to say that there's anybody I give up on, but I will give up now. I'm at an age now where if you really don't think that you are doing anything wrong or can do anything wrong, I don't even know where to begin that conversation. Because everybody makes mistakes. I just said, you're going to have crisis moments. You're going to have moments where you make the wrong call. That's just going to happen, right? So if you think that doesn't set you up to be able to make mistakes, then I'm not sure if I can help. Having said that, I'll still try, but I won't sort of hang my hat on the outcomes there, because that's the one kind of profile of a person. In the psychological literature today, they'll call that narcissistic, but that is the one profile of a person where I don't think progress can be made. And I think it becomes sort of a futile effort. But the challenge is a lot of leaders feel that they can't fuck it up. And no matter what they do, it's the right call, and they're not reflective. And so I don't like to put labels on that, because I just think as soon as we label something and categorize it, then we sort of define it. And I think there's a whole spectrum of people who can't see themselves as ever making mistakes. But I think that's sort of the criterion for whether you can make progress. So here's how, for tonight's purposes, we're going to define what success means in leadership. Yeah, I mean, look, It's helpful to read the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is what we're referring to in psychology. Just but you can also you can get wrapped up there and start going, "Oh my god, well I have this symptom and I have that symptom and I have I have this one and look over here, I've got this one too." And it's like that doesn't mean, right? So it's not that book is not for self-diagnosis and it's not even for people outside the profession to do anything with, right? But it is sort of a we have to put some kind of adjectives to or descriptors to behaviors and start to have a baseline for like, okay, so if someone is manic depressive, what does that look like? But I'll tell you something. I think it's slippery because I think we are on such a bigger spectrum as a human species than what that book accounts for, you know? And a lot of times, like focus, for example, focus disorders, um, are those are highly gifted and talented people. You know what I mean? The people with attention deficit challenges are usually extremely, extremely intelligent to the point of absolute bare genius. And then what we do is we try to, get them to focus. And what that does, I mean, they're here actually on this planet to help us open the aperture and be able to hold different things at different times. And but we're not comfortable with that, right? Because it seems like they're not paying attention. So we have to look at what we reward as a society and then what we don't reward as a society and then how we categorize that and then how we ostracize that because we want people who pay attention and focus and it's like yeah, that has its place and time, but the biggest creations of this planet weren't made by people who were super focused. Give you that little insight. um, so the definition of success in leadership for our purposes tonight is this. Listen to the words. Narrowing the gap between awareness of your wound and your practice. Narrowing that gap. So bringing awareness of your wound to your practice. Does that make sense? Now, there's so much to get to, and like I said, I'm on page 1, so I'm gonna keep moving and grooving. There will be time at the end for questions. You will have the notes if you're new, so you don't have to write all this down. And I'm following my notes really carefully, which a lot of you have said you appreciated that I kind of followed the notes because when you go back and see the notes, you can almost hear me, reading it to you. So I do that so that it's easier for you to follow and learn. Okay. So tonight we focus on more of the traditional business leadership context and concepts, as I said, and then we'll go into astrology and mythology next week. Wounds can create tension between authority and practices, policies, and behaviors. Okay. So you're a leader, you have authority. You're able to tell someone what to do in some context. And again, that can be a parenting authority that you have, or it can be an organizational authority that you have. But your wound creates tension between what you say and what you do. That's where it really shows up. So it can start to look like, oh, well, she's inconsistent, or he's, he says to do this, but then some people don't do that and he doesn't do anything there. He doesn't intercede or intervene. So is it really a policy? Do I really have to pay attention to it? Right. So the goal of our work tonight, from my perspective, to heal around this concept of wounded leadership is to be able to be a real and whole person inside of your leadership role that's aware of your wound and sees when it's being activated or triggered in the people or the context around you. To be a real and whole person in your leadership role. What happened to me in my last leadership role is I could not anymore be a real and whole person inside my leadership role. And I knew it. And there was a moment where that became very clear. And I don't, like I said, looking back, should I have maybe made a change sooner? Once I realized that, because the point of realizing that I could no longer be a real and whole person inside of that role to when I left that role was about a year and a half. It was about a year and a half. want you to think about how long a year and a half is. That would be like me realizing it now in February of 2025 and not leaving my role until August of 2026. That would be like me telling you, you're realizing it now, but you can't do anything about it until August of 2026. Now, the saving grace for me was it was a slow realization. It wasn't like God woke me up in the middle of the night and said, you do realize you can't be who you are in this role anymore, right? And then I was like, oh shit. And I have to keep doing this until August. I mean, I did start to realize it, but because I wasn't able to tell people what was going on in my personal life. I was told that I could not. And I also wasn't able to tell the people in my organization what was going on in my personal life. So nobody knew for that long. And so I had to almost have like a body double. Like, here's me during the day in front of you and in front of everybody who's around me. And then at night with my kids and with the people who are super close to me in my life, but only that, because I can't risk that anybody I know would tell anybody, because then it was just what was expected, that I wouldn't say anything to preserve the organization, right? Because it would have caused some measure of challenge, right? But here's where I take responsibility and say, I think I probably should have acted sooner or insisted on some kind of transparency, because I think it made it incredibly difficult. It's not like people aren't intuitive. You know what I mean? It's not like they can't tell some things rotten in Denmark. And it led to this bifurcation of myself, which could have been a huge crisis for me, to be honest. Like there are, when I was reflecting last night and saying, you know what, girl, I didn't have a split. Some people have a very serious breakdown. I think I had little breakdowns, but I don't think I had a full split. And that could have happened because you're literally one person by day, and then because you have to be, and you're someone else completely different by night. And it almost felt like putting on like a suit, you know what I mean? Like, okay, we can do this, and then it was like, okay, I did it. Now I can go home and like acknowledge, right, that my life is different. So I was staying strong. I was staying strong in front of you, but I was also staying strong for you, because I knew that role had been helpful to people in a lot of ways. And I didn't want to take it away, and I didn't want it to fall apart. And I kind of felt like a parent who's staying in a really hard relationship for their kids, and that included the people who were, working there, and also the people who were who were consuming what we were creating. So people will look back now and go, I could tell something was wrong, and whatever, and they could be judgmental about it too, but they didn't have to walk that path. I hope no one I love ever has to walk that path. That's the one agreement I've made with God. It's like, you know what, God, I did that with as much grace as I could, and please, in return, you're not supposed to ask for stuff, but like, please don't ask anyone that I love ever to walk that path for even a minute, let alone however many minutes are in. And so do you know what I did? It's really sad, but I kept it. I wanted to throw it away and burn it at some point, but I got myself a monthly calendar and I crossed out the days. Is that sad? Every day that I made it, where I held my shit together and I held everything together, I would, at the end of the day, cross out that day. And I did that for 9 or 10 months, until finally I was like, what's the point of crossing out the days? You know what I mean? It was almost just a sign to me that I had gotten through. Because a lot of my days were very lonely. Okay, so again, tonight's not about me, but I'm sharing some of my experiences with you, because I bet you've had moments. Maybe it wasn't on the level that mine was. Maybe it wasn't the personal and the professional combined, like, but I bet you've had an experience where it was so challenging that you had to cross out the days, maybe to prove that you're still here. You know what I mean? To prove that, because, and I would keep my little pen with it. I would put my little pen, like, every night I remember hooking my pen in there and closing the book and just thinking, okay, tomorrow night I'll get to sit down and cross out the next one. But that's no way to go through life, right? That isn't living. That's surviving. And it's yeah, Christina M said I had to shut my bar down and it felt like that, right? Like hard stuff. We're talking about stuff that some people don't make it through. Some people don't. And God bless them. You know what I mean? I'm lucky because I had good people around me, a very good therapist. God bless her. I don't know how I would have made it without her, and good friends. You know what I mean? Because the couple of people I was able to be really honest with in my life were, I could be really honest. So it was because if everything had been skating on the surface, I don't think I would have made it. Right? Yeah. Okay. So Donaldson, let's go back to the research. let's helicopter up. Donaldson in 2001 described a leadership resistant architecture. It's a very interesting concept to me. Okay. And yes, if you're here for the February class, this is the February class and you're in the right place. A leadership resistant architecture. In that research that Donaldson did, which was sort of landmark research at the time, it's hard for me to believe. I was reading that research in my doctoral program. It was right in the end of my seminars because I graduated in 2003. So Donaldson was sort of like cutting edge when he was building this concept. He was describing schools and colleges. He was describing the roles of superintendents and presidents, right? Which was sort of my domain area of expertise. But the principle is really portable. When environments become too transactional and less personal, meaning they're less reflective of people, they're less accommodating of the leader's needs, and they're less personal between the people who are being led and the people who are leading, okay? They become resistant to good leadership. You cannot create good leadership, in other words, in an environment where everything becomes a transaction. Because no matter who the leader is, now in my organization, everything was very personal. I mean, my face is the logo or my body's the logo, right? For fuck's sake. But I mean, even if you're leading a school, I trained superintendents and college presidents for a good chunk of my life at the University of San Diego. And I trained military leaders. You know, we had an incredible PhD program. We had a lot of retired military because of our proximity to, to all of the headquarters in San Diego. So we had a lot of retired military leaders who were coming back in. They wanted to go and teach at Quantico and things like that. So we had a lot of those folks in classes too. This idea of environments that can prevent you from having good leadership applies to them too. And you might think, well, that's not personal, but it is. Every leader, and I'm sure this is you too, wants to feel like they can be themselves on some level, right? Bring a little bit of themselves to their role. One of my friends just became the interim superintendent of the San Diego Unified School District, and she was my student at USD. And she's posting pictures because it's like such a kind of like a sterile office environment, and so she's putting wallpaper. She's this vibrant Latina powerhouse, and so she's putting like this beautiful wallpaper up and like huge plants, and her furniture is like different colors and stuff. And she's like, I'm trying to bring more of who I am to this office. And so even sometimes we do it through the physical details, through the philosophies that we share with people about our leadership, how we hold meetings, right? Like trying to make things personal to the extent that they can be and what's appropriate. But even military leaders want to feel like who they are authentically as people can be expressed in some way. If none of that is there, the organization will fall apart because the leader will fall apart. As human beings, ultimately, we're really here to be who we are. And I don't have to tell the people in this group that, right? And one of the hardest things as parents, we also have to let our children be who they are. That's part of our leadership as parents. And it's tough because sometimes you'll see a quality. I again, this has not been my experience because I knew I wanted my kids to be fully authentic. Having grown up in an environment where I kind of felt like I was always a little bit of a disappointment, I never wanted my kids to feel like that. So I this has not been a challenge for me. I was ready to take on my kids in whatever form they showed up and just celebrate them and support them. But for some people that's really hard because they have certain expectations like no, not while you're living in my house. My child is not going to do X, Y, and Z and it's like I watch that and I kind of just curl back a little bit because I just think to myself, that's where our wounds projected onto other people create their wounds, which are then going to take a generation or two to work out, right? We become part of the epigenetic profile. It's really important. So, but we still have to lead our kids, even though we need to find a way to accept our kids, right? It's the same with people in our organization. We need to lead them while we find ways to accept them and celebrate their unique qualities and characteristics and the things that make them special, right? There also has to be that ability for the organization to allow the leader to express themselves. And in my case, that stopped being what happened, right? My voice started not being as valued or heard or respected. And that was partly because the person I was trying to co-lead with didn't value or hear my voice, right? So then people in an organization are sort of forced to make choices about who they're going to listen to, and the louder voice wins, right? So that was my personal experience, and it really, really was hard too, because that's again, I think I was in an untenable circumstance, and my only choice was to depart because there wasn't going to be a point where my voice was going to be heard anymore, and I knew it. So, and that's the point at which I chose to leave. So how do we fully become ourselves as leaders? Takes us back to Warren Bennis. If you remember when I was first teaching you these session ones and we were talking about those big, Bass, Bennis, Burns, who are the big three forefathers of modern leadership and organizational theory. And Warren Bennis's absolute tome of a book, right? Like if there's only one leadership book you ever read, it should be On Becoming a Leader. He talks a lot about this, about authenticity and about, the leader as sort of being the not just the caretaker of an organization, but the one who sets the temperature, right? And so, but how do you set a temperature if you're not even able to fully be present and be who you are? People don't know who you are. They're not going to have faith and trust in your vision. So the whole thing starts to devolve. So our wounds then are double-edged swords when it comes to this understanding who we are as leaders. Your wound can, on the one hand, become a catalyst for growth and connection. Okay. So as a leader, you can start to be vulnerable and share with your people and say, hey, I'm noticing this in our organization. Here's how I'm experiencing it. I would like to hear how you're experiencing it and see how we can together through our sharing and through our exploration of this dynamic or this, whatever this is, figure out how we can grow from it and make things better. That's how a wound can be a catalyst for transformation and growth and actually make relationships stronger because that little bit of vulnerability that you show can tell people in your organization that it's okay, it's safe to trust you, right? That they can also trust you with their concerns. And when you raise a concern about something that's happening, then you don't need that, some organizations have that box where you can go and anonymously drop your little notes or whatever. I always liked the idea of an organization that didn't need that, where you could just say in a meeting, hey, we're doing things this way. I think it sucks. Excuse me, this sucks, and you didn't need to put a little nameless, faceless slip of paper in a box. However, the other side of that sword is that your wounds can become catalysts for crisis and chaos. Mine did a little bit at SG. When I got to a sort of a tipping point where I spoke up in a meeting. I was just like, what we're doing right now is not what I tried to create. We're just getting away from everything that I wanted here. And it's hard because my whole life has been about being able to show up and be who I am. And this is my house. And I at least need my voice to be heard. And these things are not aligned to my voice and my vision. And I think that matters. And I remember you could have heard a pin drop and maybe one or two reactions. I don't even remember who they were from, but mostly nothing. And then moving on in the agenda. And it caused me to, I got up and walked out. I was just like, no. Now, that creates a lot of instability in an organization, doesn't it? But I also was just like, I haven't created an organization where people feel like maybe they don't see it, maybe they don't agree, they don't feel like they can speak to it, they don't care, or maybe they don't think this matters, right? They don't think that me feeling like this isn't my house anymore matters. And I look back and I'm like, I probably shouldn't have gotten up and walked out, but I also just felt like I didn't know how to sit there for the rest of the meeting, honestly. Now, again, looking back, I probably should have wrapped up my time as soon as I noticed that nothing was going to be acknowledged. Probably should have wrapped up sooner. I probably just should have said, "Thank you so much. This is going to go where it's going to go. Unfortunately, I won't be able to be part of its new evolution, and I just wish everybody really good luck." And I will always wonder what would have happened, how things might have been different. And maybe better, maybe not, if I had just gracefully exited when I realized this wasn't my house anymore. But I held out this hope. I kept thinking like things are going to get better or this is going to change. It's like we always do. Like maybe tomorrow will be easier. I'm going to cross off today. Today was fucked up, but like maybe tomorrow's going to be better. And it wasn't getting any better. And that's where I think I bear some responsibility. I don't think I could have handled meetings any easier than I did or better than I did, where it was awkwardly frustrating. But again, I really didn't want it to fall apart. And I think I knew it was going to fall apart. And then ultimately, I don't know what's happening with it, right? But it's definitely not my house anymore. Okay, so your wound as a leader either leads you closer to people or it creates division among them. Or it can also, not just create division, but it can isolate you from people. And it can isolate people from your story. And it can isolate, this is the biggest challenge of all of this. It can isolate you from your story. It can cause you, all of what we're talking about tonight can cause you to wonder who the fuck you are. Who am I? If I'm not that, you know what I mean? Like, wait a minute, I've spent all this time figuring out who I am. I am that, but it can literally pull you away from your own story. Happiness in life is really nothing more than being able to be congruent with your own story. And your story needs to be refined and authentic and true and healed and all of those things. But if something is literally pulling you away from who you know yourself to be, that's where the break comes. That's where something professional or personal can become deeply almost can make you physically ill, because the mental challenge of that, if you think that doesn't show up in your body, then we haven't talked enough about energy work, right? Like those emotions of feeling like not just cognitive dissonance, like I'm having to hold two realities at the same time, but personal dissonance. Who I think I am isn't who I'm being allowed to be. So what do? You ultimately, and that's what I learned. I just think I probably should have done it sooner. You have to step back from that, right? Now, in the process of putting myself back together, and again, I'm so curious when the time comes for conversation and discussion to hear from you, but like, you've gone through tough stuff, right? You've gone through death and grief and loss and loss of children and loss of parents and loss of close friends, and you've gone through professional disruptions and whatever, being fired from jobs and stuff. So you know what it's like to put yourself back together on micro and macro levels. The process of putting myself back together, though, was really, I realized, and I'm so grateful that I had good people in my life to mirror to me, back to me, like, remember who you are. I'll show you until you remember. My hands are like, I can feel that energy between them. But people really did. Like, no, I'll look in my eyes. I will show you who you are until you remember. And it took that, right? And this is where people will say, well, as long as you're not yelling, I'm okay with the all caps. I don't think they're yelling, but yeah, if you're yelling, don't do that. But I think some of you are just like probably screaming from the rooftops. Yeah, right. Let us love you until you love yourself. I needed people to do that. Now, there are some people who would say, you shouldn't need anybody. And, all we need is ourselves and go within and all that stuff. I will tell you, I'm just being honest. I did need people. I absolutely needed mirrors. I needed a fun mirror. I needed a loving mirror. I needed a magic mirror. I needed all those things. So when we say, you've got all the tools you need and you don't need anybody else, I'm going to say for the rest of my life, I do not believe that's true. I am because we are. I am because, and now that I've stepped into my new role and I get to work with all of you, it was really great to be able to come and get remarried by you, by the community, right? And so one of the things I hope you will let us do, if you need that support, is to do that for you. Because we can, right? It doesn't have to be an intimate partner, and it doesn't have to be somebody who's known you for 50 years. I literally, in some cases, like, I would have conversations with people and they would be like, oh, you're so this or whatever. Or they would say, what do you miss about who you were before this? And I would say it, and they would be like, but you are that. Let me give you some examples. Or I see that in you. It's still there, right? It might be buried under a foot of snow, but it's still there. Like, just dig a little deeper, you'll find it, right? And then also what I realized is some parts of who I was before, maybe it was time to let those parts go. There was a little bit of also in the rebuilding, it's like when you move and you unpack boxes, you get to decide where to put things now in a new space. And some things, like, you're like, you know what, I packed that toaster and I thought I absolutely needed that toaster. And now I realize I hate that toaster. Like, why did I bring that here? Right. It's kind of like that. Like, you get to decide again. But there was before all of this, when I go back through pictures and stuff, I can see like expressions on my face and like things in my eyes, like loneliness and fear and stuff like that, and anxiety. And a lot of that's gone. And I don't think it'll ever come back. So there are gifts to all of this, right? There are blessings and benefits. It's the toaster that you don't put back in the kitchen because you're like, fuck that toaster. I hated that toaster. Or a totally new and genuine appreciation for the things that you do choose to put back, right? So it is, you do become your 2.0. Failure to be aware of your wound as a leader leads to spillage, according to Hallowell, Hall, in case you want to go back and read some of these people. Hallowell, Hallowell, in 1997, wrote about this concept. Spillage can be the leader being splattered on or the leader splattering on people. And I experienced both, right? So that can work both ways. But spillage is the sort of the leadership term for projection, right? Which comes more out of Jungian psychology. So give it whatever name you want. If you don't deal with what's going on, then it's going to erupt, right? Me getting frustrated in meetings and walking out because it was just like so much Bay essay happening, right? Or whatever is happening. Like, I should have gotten ahead of those things so that there wasn't that spillage, because I'm sure it was complicated for the people who were there, and then complicated matters for myself too. But again, you have to look back and realize you're human. You're making decisions to stay in a certain dynamic for a certain reason and doing the best you can to manage it. Okay. So in your notes, there is something on page 3. I kind of laid this. This is my own, this is more of the research. This is my own model, because when I tried to flesh out in my own mind, like, okay, so what does leadership architecture look like? The literature talks a lot about the ground floor. I tried to figure out, okay, if there's a second floor and a third floor of like building a house of good leadership, what would be the constituent parts of that, if that makes sense? And I love that. Linda says, I have enjoyed the process of discovering who I am now, the gift of my divorce from a marriage that went on 22 years too long. Well, and the sad part for me is there's a big part of me that wishes I could go back and just have it all be the way it was, because there's been so much collateral damage. I don't know that I could have done that. But I didn't realize how far-reaching it would be, and that has been very difficult. And there's still days where I wake up and I'm like, is it all really real? Wow, it's all really real. So that part sucks, But it's also like to your point, the learning that you go through is so powerful and so valuable. And I want to reiterate, this model is true for home and work and everything in between, relationships. So the ground floor. As I learn how to be in a relationship, now, like a productive, positive, intimate relationship, you have to have time, space, and communication. This is what the literature says. So how do you create a good, solid leadership architecture? Time, space, and communication. You got to slow down. You got to be intentional about these things. Make time for people, make time for conversations, make time for process. Doesn't mean it's ever going to be enough, right? Because again, the leader's never going to be enough. If you have a boss or a manager, I bet there's still more you wish they would give you. My virtual team, I give them as much time and attention as I can. I'm sure they wish there was more. Lee wishes there was more. My kids wish there was more. I wish there was more. I wish there were 28 hours in a day. As a leader, you're never going to be enough, but you can try your best to make sure that your time is evenly divided, that you give as much attention as you can, that you're responsive to people. You know what I mean? And again, I don't do a perfect job, but it's a work in progress. Some days you're going to do better than others. Wounding leads us to separation and isolation, right? Healing leads us to integration and connection. So when you notice that you're not wanting to lean in and give the time and attention, it's because you're in your wound space. That's a cue to you. So then it's like, okay, as humans, we're here to connect and integrate. We're not here to isolate and unplug. So when you see yourself doing that, it's a sign to you. You got to create space, right? Space to live, space to function, space in relationships, space in conversation for the other people to talk, and then also make sure there's space created for you to be heard, right? And then communication, how you communicate. When you're stressed and you all of a sudden are talking to your child. This happens to me a lot. Like there's just a lot going on. And then one of my kids will have a question. And it's like, I'm just like, I got to stop and go, they're not part of whatever stress is going on. So let me slow down, focus, and not bring that energy into that space, right? Energies belong in their own spaces. And then you have to have a space that just where you can just be, and you can be held and heard, and space gets created for you and time gets created for you. And that way you don't feel resentful and you don't feel stretched too thin and all of those things. Okay, so time, space, and communication. What I'm saying is the next floor up, so once you got that laid down, because without that, nothing's going to work, right? I look back on relationships I've had that didn't succeed, which is only 2, but enough. There wasn't that time, space, communication. Especially in my main relationship, it was like we would give up time together to give time to something else, to work or to the kids or whatever. So we ceded that. I think when you cede that time, it's a mistake because it's not dedicated, it's not honoring, right? The what a relationship needs. A relationship has to have its own time, space, and communication. So once you have that in place, then you can have policies, rules of engagement, right? So we're communicating, we've got time, we've got space. Here are some baselines. Here's what I need from you, right? I want to hear what you need from me. Here's what's going to work in this space. Here's what isn't going to work, right? If it starts going too much in this direction, we need to have conversations, right? That can be as strict or as informal as you want it or need it to be. In some organizations, it's all a very strict, process. And like think about education, it has to be because you have to have so many rules and rules about rules because you're dealing with students and you're dealing with parents. And so, you know what I mean? Like everything's got to be really spelled out. In relationships, though, I still think there are rules of engagement, and we can call them boundaries instead of rules and policies. Like what I've learned is like I do have certain needs, and I in a relationship, especially an intimate one, I expect those needs to be met. In turn, I'm going to really do my best to meet the needs of my partner. But that's part of being in a relationship, is to say, okay, but are you getting what you need? And in turn for the other person to say, are you getting what you need? Right. Alice said we had to leave it at the door policy when I worked at daycare. Don't bring it in or take it home. What do you guys think about that? Don't bring it in or take it home. As a leader in my organization, I didn't necessarily like that policy because I'm a case in point teacher. So it's kind of like I deal with what's happening in the moment. I think there's a way to manage your emotions, but I think if somebody shows up to work and they're just really like crying and upset and they're expected to just stuff it somewhere and keep going, that can lead to a disconnect, right? Because that person doesn't feel like they can fully be themselves in the environment that they're in. Having said that, if you're coming to work, you have work to do and you need to be able to do that work. But, space also has to be created for you to have emotions and feelings. So I don't know. This is a tough one, right? And yeah, Jessica's reminding you to subscribe to the channel only because we are putting a setting in place because I want to make sure people are subscribed to the channel. There's a lot of fun things coming like Cosmic Comfort, and I don't want you to miss it. So we're prioritizing engagement in the feed for people who have subscribed. It's not hard. You just click the button. You've done YouTube for 100 years. You know how to do it. Okay. Procedures and interactions. Actually, I'm sorry, interactions are on the third level. So policies, rules, procedures, boundaries. If you've got a nice, firm, solid foundation and you've got good communication in place, then you can communicate boundaries and expectations. That's really what rules are about. I expect this from you. I expect you to do this, and I expect you not to do that. I expect you to attend class, and I expect you to not, vandalize school property or whatever, right? I'm reading your comments too. Carissa says, I think being able to say you're having a rough day and ask, please grant me some grace, is an authentic and gentle way to let people know where you're at emotionally. Yeah, I think so too. And what the last thing she said is the key, right? It lets other people do the same thing. Part of why I was struggling so bad is that I literally would come to work, get so upset, go in the bathroom, cry all my makeup off, knowing I had to teach at 4:00, completely redo my makeup, and then go and sit and teach like all the time. And it was incredibly difficult. And I couldn't say to anybody, hey, this is really hard. I'm having a hard time. Now, if I had said that, I probably would have broken down and it probably would have been worse. So in a way, it was better to do that, just to go in the bathroom and redo my makeup. But literally, I had to have a whole second set of makeup there, foundation all the way up, because everything would be on my clothing. I had to take off my shawl because it was covered in my makeup, and just like every other day. And I think it's okay not to be okay. And I think people are especially not okay now. When I look at the collective, like when I try to see what's happening on the collective level, my honest opinion, and for whatever it's worth, from a leadership perspective, I don't think we've recovered from COVID. I think COVID affected people on levels that we're not even consciously aware of now. I know there's a lot of research being done on it, and I think it'll be our children's generation who really come to understand the full. I'm not talking about the disease, by the way, or the virus or whatever. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about the mental effects of, isolation, shutdown, which, obviously for a time was important, right? To keep people's health safe. I'm immune compromised. My mom had COPD. Like, we had to protect everybody, right? But the mental effects of that isolation, which is, again, the worst aspect of human condition, is to feel isolated. I was struggling to get through every single day because I was isolated in my own way, right? And I had just come through the pandemic. I mean, I came through the pandemic 2021. My mom died in August of 2021. This all happened in 2022. So I went from being physically isolated from people to now being mentally isolated and emotionally isolated, and without one of my biggest sources of support on the planet anymore. It was like, really? And then that went on, right, for 18 months. So I think anybody who had trauma on top of COVID, like, you dealt with multiple levels of mental health. And I think we're still struggling to put the pieces back together. And now we've kind of like, we're still figuring out how to interact with each other, don't you think? A little bit. I mean, it's not as hard as it was, but it's only 2025. Like, we have to remember, this was only 4 years ago that we were in the middle of all of this. And again, Diane says, I'm still isolated. If you're isolated now, think about how long you've been isolated. It's the one thing human beings can't really tolerate, because we need community. And so one of the things I'm going to really ask you to do, again, if you're willing to be vulnerable, is use our Facebook group as a place to say, hey, guess what? I need a little mirroring to me. I need to be seen. And here are the parts of myself that I feel like I've shed or I've lost. And, I would just love some mirroring back. All we really need is for people to say, I see you. I see you. I support you. Here's one way I see that in you, or here's something that's worked for me to connect with more of that. Right. Really, like, lean on each other. This is a really cool community. And I will tell you right now, I will absolutely stand with you, because it's the one thing we can do for each other. And it's not dysfunctional to mirror to each other. It's the humanity in us that does that. Like, we are here to keep each other here. Don't you think? Like, so many people I know are pretty honest with me, and a lot of times have said, like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't, why am I even here? And it's like, I think it's okay sometimes to say things like that, to normalize it a little bit, because then it gives people a chance to say, I need you. I need you to be here. You make a difference to me. And if you make a difference to me, you make a difference to a whole lot of other people that you just don't see. And God, it was so good to have people say that to me at a time when I was feeling like that. Like, why am I here? To live this, like, to be two different people in one body. And it was like, you're here because you will get through this, and I need you. And, this too shall pass. But that's why I create the communities that I do, because I know the value of connection, and I know what it's like to live without it. Right. I've certainly had moments where I thought, I can't do this anymore. And I stayed for the people. It's true. Some people say I'm here for the food. I'm here for the people. Well, I'm here for the food too. To be honest, I am. As far as I know, in the higher dimensions, they don't have, pasta and taquitos and sex. I can live without sex. I can. I mean, I don't want to, and I don't like to live without. Yeah, what about cats? I'm here for the animals. I'm here. I am. I'm here for the things, right? Can they eat if they want? I don't know. I don't know. My experiences on the spirit side is that, because there's no vessel, right? So there's no like biological need for food. So I don't know if they get into it as much as we do, but man, life would be hard without taquitos and cats. I mean, I'm mad at my cat right now because he brought a bird in, and I feed my birds. So I'm just like, I'm not speaking to him right now, but in general, I'm here for him, right? Okay, the third floor of leadership architecture, right? So we have time, space, and communication. Those are the non-negotiables. Then we have rules, policies, procedures, boundaries, and relationships, if we're talking about relationships. And again, boundaries are not a bad thing. I think it's very good to say, I have needs. And if we're going to be in a relationship, these are the needs that I have that I know need to be met. And that's a hard stop, full stop. You don't want to do those things. That's okay. But those are the things that I need. And those are my bare minimums. And then the third floor of the building, if we get those two settled, right? Interaction, right? Time spent with people, which is valuable. It's good for us. Gatherings. The introvert in me kind of goes like this, but it is good to spend time with people in person sometimes. At some point, I will get back to doing things in person. I will. Not that everybody's going to be able to make it out here to wherever I have a little space, but if you can, be cool to do that. I think doing things in person is important. Even just going and having a coffee. And again, the introvert of me is like, I have a coffee machine downstairs. I don't need to go to Starbucks. I make better coffee anyway. But sometimes it's nice, right, to have a gathering or just go for a walk. And I'll tell you something, if you really feel alone, one of the coolest things that people in my neighborhood do is, and they're pretty successful. And I think it's cool. And there was actually one person who posted it, and I reached out to them because I was like, the energy feels right. I'm going to reach out to them and see if they live kind of close to me, and maybe they'd like to go walk around my neighborhood. It was kind of at the height of when I was feeling isolated. They go on Nextdoor. Have you seen that? Nextdoor is like a website, and your neighborhood has one. Everybody's neighborhood has a Nextdoor, and it's really just people in your zip code. And they'll post and say, hey, I'm new to the area, or hey, I'm not new to the area. I'm just I'm a young mom, and honestly, right now, all I have is my baby, and sometimes I just want to have an adult conversation. And would anybody like to go for a walk with me? I live near X Park, and and it's you might go, well, is that safe or whatever? But they vet the people who come onto Nextdoor and verify that they live in the neighborhood. And you could do it on your terms. You can meet them in a very public place and say, I'm going to be at the cafe at 1:00 if anybody wants to spend time, or send me a private message and we can connect there, and you can vet them by looking them up online or whatever. But I know people personally who have built really cool friendships by just reaching out and saying, I need some adult time. I don't really have anybody. Is anybody else? And then the comments on those posts when they come up, which I see them about once a month around here, are always like, oh my God, I'm so glad somebody said how hard it is to build friendships as an adult. I will totally send you a private message. I'm lonely too. And then they find each other that way. And I just think it's the coolest thing, because it's people in your neighborhood that you wouldn't have met if you hadn't cast your net. Or you might look for somebody else's post and write to them, if you don't want to be the one to, because, when I was single, I was lonely. I didn't want to go on a dating app. That to me, I can't. And I'm not judging you if you do it, but I don't want to. And I'm somewhat recognizable. So it's just kind of creepy to me. And I just heard bad stories about people's experiences. So I didn't end up doing anything like that. But I did reach out to, to try to make friendships, because that felt right at the time. Oh, I love that. I'm just reading your comments, and we'll get to discussion too. I just want to finish my notes, but you have people in your neighborhood who are lonely and would like to be your friend. So points of contact. Now in organizations, that means making time with your people and for your people. Team Lair, we went out to lunch on Friday because everybody's birthday was in 1 week. So that was really fun. Like that was just a point of contact. We took time out of our workday. Didn't really get much work done on Friday, but we had a great meal together. You know, we order food together every day. We don't always eat sitting facing each other, but we order food from the same restaurant, and then we talk about what we liked. And sometimes we do sit and eat together. And those things matter. And you can look at that and say, well, that's, you know, a waste of time or a waste of money or whatever. But is it a waste? I think it's an investment. And as my kids get older, I have to make conscious time with them. Like Zoe and I, because I'm leaving for Tucson tomorrow, are going to watch a movie later, and we order shaved ice. That's our like kind of special treat that we do together. So she was like, we were talking about how I'm leaving tomorrow, and she's like, movie and shave ice later, and I'm like, 1000%, we're totally doing movie and shave ice. And then we talk about the flavors, like we switch it up sometimes, you know what I mean? But like those points of, even though we live in the same house, right? It's still about making those, or like we've already talked about how we're going to do her favorite lunch next weekend when I'm back. And it just gives us like little things to look forward to, right? I took my son to dinner, out to a really fancy dinner, not this last weekend, but weekend before. And we want to do it again. I was just like, I want to go out to nice dinners with you. It's so nice that you're a man now and you can drive, and we enjoy the time together so much. So points of interaction and connection, whether it's in the workplace or with people that you love. Okay, so I'm on page, let's see. I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for Q&A. Let me kind of move through the most important parts of this. I want you to ask yourself and think about it while I'm talking. Where does it hurt? You know, when you come into a doctor's office, they always ask you, where does it hurt? Oh, my shoulder hurts. Well, where does it hurt? Well, it hurts right here, because that's a different pain than back here. And that's a different pain than over here, right? Really try to isolate for yourself where you're hurting, and then try to figure out what would help and who could help. And then be brave enough to ask for that help. You know, who's on your team? And if you don't have a team, make a team. Trust me, there are people around you who would love to be your friend, would love to support you, probably have been waiting for the chance to do that. But even if you feel like there's nobody, I've given you some suggestions tonight for ways you can reach out and connect more deeply. Okay. I'd spend a little time in the notes defining, giving you different words for wound, because some people don't like the word wound. So it could be a disorienting moment, a dilemma, a crisis, a conflict. But anyway, so I'm not going to spend time on that. I want to talk about a process and some examples that are not less about me and more about just sort of general, that maybe you can sink your teeth into. So there's a process when a wound happens to a leader. That leader either doesn't acknowledge that wound, can't do anything about it, that wound, right? So they just stuff it like I did. I stuffed it. But it comes out, right? We know this. Jung is the best teacher for projection and spillage. What spillage does is it destroys the architecture. It tears the building down. So you spent all that time making that foundation. I certainly did. I think at the time it was like 12 years. Is that right? 11 years. Time, energy, connection, intention, right? And then the wound spilling out disrupts the architecture. And then there's the collateral damage. Everybody gets hit in that tidal wave, right? I mean, spillage doesn't ask you how you want it to spill and who you want it to hit and who you want it to avoid, right? It's like a tsunami. So if you let it get to that point, to that tipping point, you're not going to be able to control what that spillage looks like. And it's true for everyone, right? Jessica's asking if I think we get too focused on the foundation sometimes. I actually don't. I actually think that you can't over focus on the foundation. Because the foundation constantly needs to be reimagined. It needs to be, the foundation is a living thing. I think sometimes we're like, okay, foundation's done. Now I can focus on all the other things I want to do. Or like, okay, we're married. now I can just behave however I want or whatever. And it's like, I definitely took aspects of my marriage for granted for sure. And maybe didn't attend as much to the foundation of it because there were so many other competing priorities, right? So now I'm much more careful. Like I don't have any plans to ever get married again, because I don't need to, and I've seen just sort of a side of it that isn't great. But I may be in a long-term committed relationship, and so I'm really aware now of, like, don't take that for granted. Like, that is wholly sacred. If you have that, that is something to be treasured. So the key is to understand, number one, right, that wounds happen to leaders, and then address those wounds before the spillage happens, which I wish I would have done. But again, I don't know what that would have looked like. We can woulda, coulda, shoulda all day long. Maybe it would have been better. Maybe it wouldn't have been better. It would have been different for sure. But I don't know that it would have been any easier. Okay. To do this work requires vulnerability, authenticity, courage, and support. There has to be, if you're being undermined, it's none of this matters. If you raise your hand and somebody says no thank you, then there's no point. So there are conditions under which even the best efforts that we're talking about tonight are not going to succeed. So to heal this dilemma, we first need to understand our leadership type, our influence type. Do you have direct influence or indirect influence? If you're a parent, you have direct influence. If you're somebody's boss, you have direct influence. You can tell people what to do as long as your kid's under 18, which mine's about to turn 18 in a few weeks. So I'm going to lose my direct influence. I will have more indirect influence. By the way, in parenting, it's been my experience, the extent to which you have indirect influence when they're after 18 is an output of how well you've managed your direct influence. Because if you don't do a good job up until 18, they're not going to listen to you after 18. So I feel like that's an earned privilege. We'll see how much indirect influence I have, but I have a feeling I will have some. Okay. And your preferred leadership style. And this goes back to session 1 when I walked you through all the different leadership styles. I told you my leadership, servant leadership always resonates most with me. So my leadership style is to see the people that I'm serving or that are following me, I see them as having influence over me, right? Because I like to think about life as a co-creation. And then understand your core wound. Does the wound lead you toward alignment with your type and your style, closer to your story? Right? My feelings that maybe I'm never good enough, which unfortunately the outcome of my marriage validated that, right? Like I wasn't good enough to keep that relationship intact. Does that lead me toward alignment with my leadership style, which is to serve others? Or does that take me away from it? Is that resonant with my story and my style, or is it dissonant with my story and my style? The goal is to create resonance between your wound and your story. Because then your wound becomes medicine, right? If your wound can be used to highlight your story, to share your story, to be vulnerable, and leads to people hearing you and feeling heard and all of those things, then the wound becomes a medicine. And that's the goal, right? So if the leader feels threatened by the environment or the people, the leader will withdraw. Here's an example of how this works, okay? Leader feels threatened by something in the organization. The leader withdraws from the organization, either physically or mentally, emotionally, spiritually. That leaves people feeling unsure and unsupported, which can lead to them leaving, which disrupts the organization. And now the leader's role and the future of the organization and everything is threatened, right? You see this happen a lot, and there's 1,000 examples of it. There's 2 ways that can go. The leader can double down on their positional authority, like, no, you will follow this. Even though I'm backing off, you're going to do what you need to do because I'm paying you, or because you have to, or whatever, which is not sexy. which actually leads to further emotional detachment, right? Or you can rely on your relational authority and be open and vulnerable and say, actually, the process that we're going through right now, everybody has caused me to feel this way, and I'm aware of it. So here's what I want to do. Here's how I want to come back in and reconnect. Here's what would help me, for all of you in the organization. Maybe we can have, each team can have a conversation about this, and then we can get back together and brainstorm some strategies for how we can build a more connected, unified organization or something like that. You can see how there's two opposite reactions. One is, I'm the leader and everybody's going to do what I say no matter what. And the other is, I'm the leader, but I'm human. And maybe we can work with this humanity point as a point of connection that can actually lead us to growth and development and make our team stronger. In some cases that works, and in some cases it doesn't. And then that's when you get to decide, okay, well, is this the right environment for me or not? And that's ultimately, sometimes it's not. And that's when you have to detach for good. So everything is context dependent, is what I mentioned in my notes. So just in conclusion, I want to talk about a family example of this too. Parents, right, go through wounds. Parents go through divorce or separation, or they have intense, they're together, right? But they're going through something intense with their child. Their child, Dave and I went through this when Zoe was diagnosed with her chronic illness when she was very young. That caused a great deal of stress and strain, right? So parents can withdraw. They can put too much focus on one child and not enough focus on the other, right? We hear about this a lot in families where there's one child that has special needs, but there's other children. And so I'm just giving you examples. So then the kids can withdraw. So the parent experiences stress, one or more of the children withdraws. And then again, the same thing can happen. The parent can rely on positional authority, like, no, you're going to sit down at this table. You're part of this family. You're going to have dinner here. You're going to be home by 7, no matter what. Or the parent can rely on their indirect influence, create a new architecture that's more inclusive and say, hey, you know what? We've put a lot of energy over here on Sally for X, Y, and Z reasons, but we're aware of it. And so we want to build a new foundation where she still gets everything that she needs, but everybody feels like they're part of this whole, because we're a family and families come together. And even though we experience challenges, there's space for everybody here. And we need to make that intentional. So we're going to rebuild, again, to the architecture point, we're going to rebuild the foundation. We're going to come back together. You see both outcomes. You see both things happen. The second one is always harder because it requires you to be so much more vulnerable and say, hey, we're having a challenge and we're not managing it in the best way right now, but I think we can do better. Here's what better would look like. Here's the steps we're going to take toward that. What do you guys think? Requires some conversations that can be challenging but worthwhile. So crisis will happen. How you respond will be successful if it's aligned to your story and your values, just to summarize everything from tonight. Leadership without wounds equals being able to tell and embody your story authentically within the collective story. Still be me within this space. If that can happen, that's how you avoid the wounded leader dilemma. But if I can't be who I am in this space and be authentic, then we have a challenge. So next session, and I'm going to turn it over to your questions and comments because I really want to spend the last 20 minutes hearing from you, will be the teaching next week is the 7 heavy heroes, the 7 big emotions, and how we can manage them energetically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, in functional ways. And I'm focusing more on the energy work because, yes, when the big heavy emotions come, there's all kinds of medical interventions and things like that, but that's not my work in the world. My work in the world, I support all those things, but my work in the world is to offer you additional suggestions and techniques and possibilities for how to work through those things. Okay. It's all you now. Give it to me. Beverly says, I am because I'm surrounding myself with highest good with ease. Like a tree that's got branches no longer serving her, she releases those branches. That's true. But letting go is hard. I'm a keeper. You know what I mean? I like to have and to hold. So it is hard for me to let go, even when everything's pointing in that direction and it's clear that that's the right thing to do. It's still very hard for me. Some people letting go is really easy. And a lot of that's rooted in childhood, right? They went through experiences where they were let go easily, or they moved a lot or whatever it is, and so they're just used to having their environment be less static. I grew up with a very static, stable home life, and so for me to then experience something like I did, which was incredibly isolated and destabilizing, was very strange. I was like a fish out of water, and I didn't have any training for it. Yeah, Lauren said that was her. Her sister was ill, ironically, with a very similar condition to what Zoe has, and so she became invisible. And it's tough as a parent, I can tell you, because like I've had to have those conversations with Nick, where it's just like, no, Zoe isn't the only child, right? And Nick always had things like baseball and places in life where he got attention and he got focused so that he didn't feel. I mean, I can't speak for him, but I think we're pretty conscious about that. Jessica's asking, Jen's a Taurus, so she doesn't give up easily. Jessica's asking, how do you manage time when you have a tendency to obsess over details? At some point, so love is in the details, right? Like it's so important to attend to them because they matter. I will give myself a time boundary. You know what I mean? Like this particular part of this particular thing, I'm going to work on it for 20 minutes. And sometimes I'll set a timer or use a sand thing. I always forget the name of that. And it's one of my favorite tools. But I will say like 20 minutes, or I'm gonna work on this while the rest of this song is playing. And then when the song is done, then I'm done. Because at some point you have to move forward, right? It's really, really hard, especially when you want everything to be perfect. Hourglass. Thank you. It's like, really, Athena? Tip of my tongue. Donna said, profound advice from my chiropractor this week. If the people you live with won't change the people you live with. And sometimes you can do that and sometimes you can't. Sometimes, sometimes you can't change the people you live with. So you have to change your relationship or your orientation to them, or you have to, give them a certain, decide what your boundaries are. And then there's lots of energy work techniques you can do too to manage people's energy, which is going to be the whole subject of March. March is going to be really interesting because we're going to talk about relational systems. And it's a lot of organizational behavior stuff for the first week. And then we're going to talk more about managing the energy of people. Because I've been managing big groups for a long time. And it's not for the, I don't like the word weak, but it's not for the not for the timid, But I mean, I was always leading groups. I walked into a classroom like, you better know how to hold that space or those kids will run roughshod over you, right? I taught everything from 7th grade to PhD, and 18-year-olds, they think they got your number, and I was very clear I had their number and a grade book. So if they wanted to pull that malarkey, they could find their way to the door, right? So yeah. In the Bob Proctor book, is it written like an interview? I'm curious if the audiobook is different. Yeah, it's kind of interview. Well, not really. I mean, it's more narrative. I just took it out of the room. Otherwise, I would show it to you. But it's kind of like it's written like simple wisdom. It's so easy to consume because but you have to, with books like that where you think, oh, this is so easy, and you're just flipping through the pages. Oftentimes you need to slow down because it's actually thicker and deeper than it comes across. I realized with that book in hindsight, like, wow, that was really deep. And then some books, seem rich and then you realize it's a marshmallow. You pinch it and there's nothing there. Yeah, not for the faint of heart. um, let's see. Christina says, I work hard to let my direct reports know that I'm here to support them. I allow myself to show my flaws so my team feels like they can reach out to me when they need support. I think that's really important. I mean, again, people will say, well, you can do too much of that, right? You can be too accommodating and too vulnerable and too open and too whatever. Um, but I think I always wanted to know who I was working for. I just a little bit. They didn't have to give me everything, but I liked that sense of vulnerability. I liked that sense of visibility. And I liked that sense of shared meaning and shared connection. And I never thrived where there wasn't some kind of personal connection to whoever I was working for. And I also had to respect them. I've seen every possible kind of leader, and I really was conscious of the examples I didn't want to follow and the examples I did want to follow. But certain types of organizations support what we're talking about tonight more than others, right? Like in education, there are oddly harsh boundaries and a lot of politics. And that's where I grew up as a baby leader. You know what I mean? So what I learned in education was, because I was always close to my students and my students always liked me. I won the teaching award 2 years in a row. And one of the faculty members came to me, I think the professor of the year, came to me and said, that's the death knell for you. I mean, the administration, as soon as you win a teaching award twice in a row, it's like, what's she doing that the students like her so much? You know what I mean? Is she going easy on them? Is she an easy grader? And it's like, I wasn't. I was actually tough as shit. But I spent a lot of time with them, and I was always close in age to them, but I was also like, we would do things. So after class, I would be like, let's go get Mexican food in Old Town San Diego and go to the Crystal Shop. And a lot of us did. We carpooled and we spent time together. I didn't do it all the time. My kids were small, but I was just like, class would end around 7 p.m. and we were always hungry. So we would go get nachos and go to the Crystal Shop for an hour. And we all talk about those times still, that it was really special. At the end of my last class that I co-taught with Zachary Green at USD, we had a dance party once a month after class. So we would just stay for 2 hours and we would queue up some awesome playlists of like 80s stuff and 90s stuff and just dance. And, sometimes people would bring food, and it was just connecting time. And it led to deeper conversations in the classroom because we knew each other, That's a benefit, though, of working with adults. So, yeah, try the actual book instead of the audiobook. I'm not a huge audiobook person. Sometimes I like it because I like being read to, but I dog ear my pages, and so I'm a fan of just having the actual book in your hand. Yeah, Old Town San Diego has the best Mexican food, I think. Old Town San Diego and Tucson, because Tucson has really authentic Sonoran food. So those are the two places that I recommend for just like, in Old Town, they're making the tortillas by hand and you can see them in the window making them. And then the nachos and everything are made from homemade tortillas, and it's next level. Okay. Yeah. So, but hit me with some questions about what it's like to face crisis as a leader. Whether that's in parenting or in your family dynamics or in organizations. Bufnita's asking, how do you handle when people constantly get jealous of you? I've achieved a lot for my age, but I always feel like people are constantly hating. It's hard to have friends that are actually happy for you. Yeah, I struggled with this a lot. There were a lot of people who were shitty. It would be haters or jealous or whatever. And even now, like there's some of that stuff comes up, and not as much anymore, but it does come up sometimes. How do you guys handle it? I'm curious. I look at it and I think it's so natural to have envy, right? Envy is it's an emotion as old as time. And one of the things I've always reminded myself is even when I've kind of had everything that people think they would want to have, I didn't, right? I've always had health challenges, um, core wounds, that I've had to struggle with, my own insecurities, right? So I think it's just staying grounded and staying rooted and knowing who you are that allows you to get through that. There are people out there who will be genuinely happy for you. What I've had to watch out for is people who want to be my friend because they think they're going to get something out of it, and I have had that experience too. Now I'm more like dialed into that, and I can kind of smell that, from a mile away. And again, that happens less and less now because I know that the people I have around me now are here for the right reasons. But kind of like fair weather friends, there's definitely some component of that. Um, so I think it's just about learning to discern in relationship. And we all get, fooled from time to time, like, oh, I thought that was a good friend, or I thought that person was really here for me, or whatever. Um, but it does teach you to appreciate, like, I mean, I know a lot of people, but my inner circle's pretty small. But it's people that I know for sure, like, have got my back, and they know that I've got their back too. You know what I mean? But that usually is that gets revealed over time. But it's certainly challenging. What if you're a leader in your industry profession, but there's nepotism within the company? Oh, doesn't that suck? So that means that people get, promoted, or, they get rewards of whatever kind because they're connected to people in the organization, either through familial ties or through some kind of for some other reason. And that's really hard too, because that can lead to resentment, right? It's like you're going to max out at some point, probably because somebody's going to get promoted over you or chosen over you for other reasons that don't have to do with their performance. And then you have to decide, is that the organization for you? Is that where you want to be? Or do you want to take your skills and your gifts somewhere where there isn't that kind of, and nepotism happens. I have a friend who's like, I totally practice nepotism in my company because she just, like, the leaders in her company are her grown children. And she's like, sorry, I've just been really screwed over. And so I totally practice nepotism. And these are always going to be my senior managers in my company. And I'm just like, lucky you. Like, I don't think my kids will ever really want to work directly in what I'm doing. They're such individuals and they go their own way. Maybe they will. But they have such different visions for their futures and what they want to do, right? So that could be really challenging too. Here's the thing. I love that you're aware of it. You know what I mean? Because some people aren't, and then they can't make choices and decisions. So I think it is powerful that you at least know that that's happening, but very hard to overcome. How do you face crisis when you are over emotional? Sometimes not well. Sometimes not well. You're going to do your damn best. It's very hard. But, I will tell you something, like, I have really learned, and I've learned it the hard way, to, first of all, that I don't have to stay anywhere that I'm really uncomfortable. I may have to make some sacrifices in order to make a transition. May not be easy. But I'm not here to suffer. So you can decide some things, right? And in the middle of a crisis, if you're super emotional, it is time for you to take a step back and take a break for a minute. And ideally find someone to confide in who you can say, listen, this is happening and I feel like I'm going to explode. I'm either going to scream and cry, or I'm going to yell, or I'm going to, throw some kind of adult temper tantrum, right? And I'm all fire. So when I'm pissed, I am pissed. That's why I posted that video of her where she was like, I am pissed in the pits of hell, and I am pissed in my mansion in heaven. I am pissed today. And usually everybody knows that I'm pissed, right? So, it's about stopping and realizing what would my higher self tell me to do in this situation? Now, sometimes for me, like I did engage that. When I faced that moment of saying, "Hey, this what we're doing now is not working for me." And there was just like no reaction, either because of lack of care or fear of consequences of saying anything. Um, I felt like my higher self did want to get up and walk out. I mean, you know what I mean? Like I feel like in hindsight, I think I did the right thing. Now you may call that a knee-jerk reaction, but it felt like the right thing to do. But I think taking a step back, because usually like our big knee-jerk reactions, usually the next day, we don't have the same attachment to the emotion. It's important to create some space there. Really, really, truly. Linda says, I look at it as a challenge accepted. Chances are the person just doesn't know me very well. It's true. Katie says, I tend to ignore it, to be honest. I know the truth. Once they show you who they are, believe them and tread carefully. Yeah. So, because the second time something happens with somebody, it's shame on you. Right? So first time, shame on them, which I really believe that to be true. Interesting. Yeah. So like Linda and Noelle might have an interesting conversation with each other in the group or offline about how you're managing that. Cause that is not a challenge I have faced, nepotism in organizations. I just haven't. I definitely have faced being in organizations where bosses had favorites. And sometimes I was accused of that too, but I genuinely really didn't have favorites. I tried to look for the good in each person and what they brought to their role. I really didn't have people where I was just like, if I'm going to give something, I'm going to give it to them. I really didn't. But I think people perceived it that way. But people are always going to perceive it that way. In organizations, people are always looking for, did somebody get something that I didn't get? Melissa says, I worked at my place of employment for almost 10 years. I don't like to take anything new with me to work ever, whether it's new scrubs, a new purse, a new lunch bag, anything because of this. Isn't that interesting? So yeah, it's like sometimes you don't want to make waves. You don't want people to be jealous. You don't want people to be envious and all of those things. Yeah, because somebody might be shitty to you because of it. Isn't that interesting? And here's what I'm going to say. This is really important awareness for you, because this means you're not feeling like you can be fully authentically who you are because of jealousy or whatever it is. And so notice that and decide how you want to manage that now versus letting it, the whole point of tonight was, with the story side anyway, was I think I let things go too far past where I could manage it anymore. And I cracked. You know what I mean? And I should have realized it wasn't going to be manageable at all from the get-go and just stopped. But sometimes we do things for other people, or we tell ourselves we're doing things for other people. Like, I can do it. I can do anything for a little while. You know what I mean? And like when you start having those conversations with yourself, it's time to make a change. And again, that change can be difficult and it can have consequences, but so can going through this, whatever it is that isn't working for you anyway. When it breaks down a different way, it's not going to be any better. It just will have lasted a little bit longer. Sometimes that's not necessarily better. Infinity said, I put a stop to a toxic person at work. Putting boundaries work like a charm. Setting up boundaries has been difficult. Yeah, like I don't want that, right? And I think that's important to have boundaries. This is what I'm willing to tolerate, or this is what I'm willing to accept. Yeah, and I will say, like, as a leader, I've been tough at times with people. I have really high expectations. I really do, because I have really high expectations of myself. And I have been known to like push and push and push and push and like, can we do more? Can we do this? Can we, how much can get done? And I've had to learn to manage that on my side too, because at the end of the day, no matter how much people care about what they're doing, it's a job. And if you are the leader, and especially if it's your thing, it's not a job for you. So you can't expect the same input, right, from people who are, no matter how much they love it, are there because they need to be there, right? Sandra, I'm a clusterfuck with knee-jerk reactions. At least you know it. I mean, again, and we can get better, right? We can learn, we can manage things differently. That's what my whole time with you tonight is about, my reflections on how I could have handled my situation differently. And like I said, I don't think the outcome would have been any better, but it would have been calmer, maybe more of a clean cut than an extended, breakdown. So, Emilia, I'm getting here. Thoughts on how to address someone you lead, but you're also friends with, but they don't know how to separate friends from boss, and at work are sometimes disrespectful. That for me has become very easy. I'm totally serious. That's just a conversation like, hey, I'm going to say something, and this could feel awkward for a minute, but it has to be said. I am absolutely your friend, but when we're at work together, could you please not, do fill in the blank or say these kinds of things, because it feels disrespectful. Now, I have a philosophy, and I even practice it now in the work that I do. If there's a one-time thing, like employees have an issue with each other or an issue with me or something like that, I don't necessarily feel, but this is coming from my group dynamics work, which we're going to talk about in March. I don't necessarily feel like I have to jump in and solve it right then and there and pull everybody apart or say, is there a problem here or whatever, if it's a one-time thing. I look for patterns. Something happens twice, it's not a coincidence. It happens a third time, it's a pattern. And patterns need to be addressed. And so that's one way into the conversation is, you know what, this hasn't just happened once. This is why I'm bringing it up. It hasn't just happened once. It hasn't just happened twice. It's happened like 3 or 4 times. And I want to bring it to your attention because you may not even be aware that you're doing it, but it's bothering me. And because we're friends, I feel like I can say that to you. And maybe you have a different perspective on it, and I would love to hear it, but this is how it's affecting me, and it's important for me to tell you that. That pattern thing gets you into conversations in an interesting way. It's frustrating because some people do like to deal with things as they happen. Like, this happened and we're going to talk about it, versus like, you know what I mean? Maybe they weren't trying to step on your toes. Maybe that's how you took it, or maybe they were having a bad day. But 3 bad days in a row is a pattern. 3 shitty remarks in a row is a pattern. 3 times you disrespect me in front of our coworkers, it's a pattern, and we're not going to do that anymore. Yeah. And you'll be respected. Ultimately, like, if I can't have that conversation with someone, they're not my friend. You know what I mean? And I would want them to bring it to me. If there was something going on and it was affecting Lee, like, I would expect her to bring it to me. Otherwise, what are we doing? Right? Like, that has to work both ways, and you have to be able to take those conversations too, right? How do you deal when your employee keeps fighting back when you're giving constructive criticism? Again, there have been moments where I've handled this really well, and moments where I haven't. Constructive criticism to some people feels like an attack because some people can't handle criticism very well. So then they take it a certain way, and then they feel they take it personally. So then now they're on the defensive, and that whole dynamic starts. And I think it's important to, and again, I would love to hear your thoughts on how you handle these things too, because a lot of you have so much experience with these things. For me, again, sometimes being really direct has been helpful. Like, hey, this isn't personal, but there's a vision for this project, and it's clear, right? And I'm trying to help you create or do or whatever they're trying to do in alignment with that. And I've got to nudge you because this is how it needs to be. We've agreed that this is how it needs to look. There's so many stories I could tell you, but I don't want to get into too much minutia, but there were definitely moments where I was just like, that is not going to work. Like what you're doing and how you're doing it is not going to work. I think you are great. I think that is not great. But those are also really difficult conversations to have. And for me, it's always better just to be short and sweet and direct and to just say this is not personal. But it's a pass. That's a pass on how that's going or the way that's unfolding. Yeah, and sometimes you can be too harsh, you know what I mean? And I've done that too, and I've tried to soften over the years because my mom used to say, "You catch more bees with honey than vinegar." Is that how it goes? And sometimes I've been real salty vinegar, and that doesn't work for people. Like you can be the iron fist, but you gotta have the velvet glove, you know? And I think negotiation and mediation skills are really important. And you got to notice your own communication patterns too. Like, do you hit like a hammer and a sledge, or do you, not try to like sugarcoat things, but like smooth things out a little bit, right? Grease the wheels. And I think I love what Noelle's saying too. Like, I don't expect anything from someone else that I don't expect from myself. Like, yeah, I mean, I do expect a lot, but I also expect a lot from myself too. Yeah, and I mean, like Jessica was saying, no one's harder on her than she is on herself. And we're all getting better at what we do. That's the other thing we have to know. Like, I know intuitively, and I bet you do too, when someone's doing something and it's falling kind of flat or they're not doing it quite, but I know when they're working on it versus when somebody's not doing things the way they need to be done and there's no care and desire to improve. The way I approach those situations is going to be completely different because one is a changeable dynamic and one is not. If people don't want to improve, you know what I mean? Then you can approach your criticism a different way. So use your intuition, right? And again, patterns. Everything comes down to patterns. First time could be an accident. Second time, third time, no, it's not an accident. And can I give you the criteria? This is really helpful before I leave you. This whole conversation is leading in this direction. The best framework for understanding how to approach a conflict in the workplace. If you're trying to understand, is this a workable situation? Is this something that we can change or make progress on or not? You want to know what it is? Never fails. And seriously, in my entire coaching career, all the people I coached for all those years and all the students I taught told me this was one of the most valuable teachings I ever gave them. And I've probably said it before to you, but it bears repeating. Skill will heal. This is not in your notes, so write it down. Skill will heal. If there's a problem, let's say somebody's underperforming in their role, skill will heal it. Is it because they don't know how to do what they need to do? Then it's a skill issue and you need to teach them, right? They're not filling in the spreadsheet the way they're supposed to every single time. And you're like, geez, I mean, come on now, we've got this spreadsheet. Joe Bobette is not putting her information in. It's now the third time. It's a pattern. Does she know how to do it? Once you've crossed out skill, then you look at will and heal. Will is she doesn't want to do it. She knows how to do it. She doesn't want to. That's a very different coaching conversation. If you know she knows how to do it and she wants to do it, there's an obstacle in her way. There's a hill in her way. Skill will heal. She doesn't have enough time to do it. She doesn't have a computer to do it. Every time she goes into the document, her access is blocked because only one person can be in the document at a time. Those are three very different conversations. If you come in hot and you're like, Joe Bobette, if you don't put that thing in that spreadsheet, I swear to God, I'm going to freak out or whatever. And she's like, why didn't you talk to me? The reason I don't put it in is because every time I go in, I get kicked out because the system only lets one person in at a time. And then you feel like a huge jerk because you are, because it was a hill and you thought it was a will. You know what I mean? Or you thought she was incompetent. And it's like, she's not incompetent. There's an obstacle in the way. And so what I have found is not making assumptions, But it is discouraging when you realize it's will. The person knows how to do it and there's nothing in their way. They just don't want to do it. Now, will you can still work around, because then you can go, well, is this person in the right role? If they really don't want to do this thing, why are they in this role? Is there something else in the organization that they would be better at? If you really like them and you really want to work with them. But even with parenting, skill, will, heal, right? Did you not put that thing away because you didn't know how to put that thing away? You didn't want to put that thing away, or something else came up, right? And give your kid a chance to respond. Okay, I just didn't want to do it. Okay, well, I need you to do it. I'm sorry you don't want to. There are things I do that I don't want to do. But it gives you that skill, will, heal moment is a super big sacred pause. And it prevents you from making assumptions that ultimately lead to problems, right? Because if we assume that somebody doesn't want to do something, but they do, they just don't know how, that's actually your problem as a leader, not theirs, right? So does this apply in relationships too? For sure. Do they not want to spend time with you, right? People in my life know, for me, it's always hill. I don't have enough hours in a day to do the things I want to do with the people I want to do it with. It's always hill with me. It's never skill. I know how to have a friendship, and I want to have a friendship. Time is always my greatest challenge, right? So, but you can look and say that person just doesn't want to do it. They know how to do it. I've told them 10 times not to do this thing in this relationship. And now we're on time number 11. And it's because that's how they want to behave, and it's not working for me. And then what you can also do is do the codependent thing of like, oh, they just don't know how to treat me, or oh, they want to treat me this other way that I want to be treated, but they can't because, and it's like, no, they just don't want to. And that sucks. So what are you going to do about it? Right? So skill, will, heal it. And then that will help you make better decisions and ultimately have more productive conversations. And yeah, I mean, that was ultimately what let me heal about my marriage. It was will. It wasn't skill or heal. It was will. And when it's will, there's nothing you can do in personal relationships, in my experience. You're going to make them want it. Really? What kind of hollow victory is that? I don't want to be in any relationship with somebody who has to be convinced to want to be in a relationship with me. I'm not perfect, but I have enough value to somebody where I don't have to tolerate that, right? I want what wants me. And but at work, this is really powerful for coaching, for employee evaluations and stuff, because we can end up seeing someone and like putting them in a box, that they really don't belong in, because we've made all these assumptions about the why, right? So yeah, actions are very important. And ultimately it all comes down to that. We can say things all day long, but when, what we do speaks volumes, doesn't it? And nobody's perfect. So the other thing I wanted to leave you with, because I know we've gone way over time, but I hope you enjoyed tonight's class. I really do. I hope it was valuable for you. I would never go into business with my intimate partner ever again. But I'm not saying you shouldn't. I just wouldn't. Nope. Because it's too hard to give first of all, people can stay without loving you. That's what I've learned. Because there's perks, and that's what happened to me. Or you can end up just with wanting to be with this person, and you love this person, but it's just so easy to give attention to the business and not to give the attention to each other. That was less my dynamic, but oh, thank you. I'm glad that this was a good class for you. Here's where I wanted to leave you. Because I wanted to leave you on like we've talked about some really tough, shitty things tonight, and I'm surprised I didn't cry more than I did. It's funny that I only cried around the older wound, not about the younger one, which tells me I've done good healing. But I wanted to leave you with the word grace. Grace, for me, has become the most important the most important thing. Giving it to myself, giving it to other people, um, looking back at moments where it's all I wanted and needed. It doesn't cost anything. It's amazing how stingy people will be with grace. Like it costs them something. It doesn't cost you anything. And the worst mistake you'll make is giving too much grace. And you can always change that. But you'll never be sorry that you gave someone grace. You just won't. Oh, I love that. Is it Banana E? First class that I've made it my mission to comment, and what a beautiful lesson this evening, grace. You're never going to be sorry that you gave somebody grace. You will be sorry if you don't. That could be a regret, but you're never going to look back and go, well, you know what? I shouldn't have given them any grace. Grace is the thing that we can give people that Spirit gives us. You know, it's the most powerful modeling we can do. Oh, banana, New York, Florida. Love it. It's everything, and it doesn't cost you anything, and you'll never regret giving it. And you can stop giving it if you need to, but can you imagine if this world was more graceful? I can. It's what keeps me going. So I want to tell you, I want to just be excited for a moment. I started this notebook at the beginning of November for class, and this is all completed notes, both sides. I have exactly, I counted earlier, I think 15 pages left in this notebook, which will get us through February. So if you haven't accessed your notes, there's a lot there. I know. I was like, holy shit, I can't believe I'm like through this whole notebook now. I'm already like looking around my house for other old empty notebooks I can start to use. So anyway, cheers. The flawed, wounded leader in me sees the flawed, wounded leader in you. And cheers for giving ourselves grace for places where we could have done better. I certainly could have done all kinds of things better in the last couple of years, but I did enough things right that I let myself have a little moment last night of just saying, like, you're a human, girl, but you know, good on you. So love you guys. Thanks to our moderators. I will see you tomorrow. So I'm not going to be doing a ton of lives, just to set expectations, because we've got a lot of territory to cover and we only have 2 days. We land tomorrow, I think at 12:30. Everything stops in Tucson at 5. And you're tired by then anyway. And then we'll be up early Thursday morning and we'll go all the way till 5. And then we're up early Friday morning. And I think we leave around noon time or 1 o'clock. So my goal is to go live at least once in each of our groups and communities. And maybe to do some kind of like static sale where there's like pictures of things that you can buy or something like that. But I'm more about education and kind of showing you things and behind the scenes. So, but I'm here for it. I just, I want to set expectations that it's just me and Lee. I don't have a big team. It's Team Athena and Lee and Shram, who's going to be, what a generous soul, helping me a great deal at the show too. So very thankful for his space, because I kind of get to use his space a little bit. And so that'll be home base for us. And I can't wait to put my arms around him. So much fun to come in the next couple of days. Stay tuned, and I'll see you soon.